Years of war distilled into a single promise, made by an 8-year-old boy kneeling in his mother's blood on a marble floor that was supposed to be sacred ground. Everything that carries the Lyons name ends by my hand. He kept it. Every campaign, every border engagement, every soldier who wore that crest and made the mistake of standing in front of Ron Ortiz on a battlefield. He kept it the way men keep vows born from grief, not because it still made sense, but because without it, he didn't know what was left of him. She didn't know any of that. Erika French grew up 3 territories from the war, in a residence that didn't appear on any official map, raised by servants paid to keep her existence quiet, and a father who visited twice a year to remind her that her value was entirely conditional. 20 years behind walls that were never called a prison, but had no door she was allowed to open, until the marriage contract arrived. Edward Lester. Brutal, ambitious, the kind of man her father chose specifically because he would never let her become anything her father hadn't already planned. 30 days. That was how long she had before the contract closed and her life stopped being hers entirely. So she ran. Not blindly, not desperately. Erika French had been preparing for this moment for years. In secret training sessions with guards she had carefully, quietly convinced, in stolen maps she had memorized and burned, in the patient and precise way she had studied every exit from a life that was never supposed to have one. She stole armor. She joined the march. She told herself she was going to find the truth about the war her father had always described in terms that made Borkpak sound like monsters, and Lyons territory sound like martyrs. She found the battlefield instead, and the battlefield had Ron Ortiz in it. 7 days of combat, 3 border engagements, a war that had outlasted the generation that started it and showed no sign of stopping. When the last Lyons line broke and the retreat began, Ron walked the field the way he always did, checking for survivors, the part of war he had never been able to skip, the one thing that kept him from becoming what people whispered he already was. He found a soldier in ill-fitting armor, too small, breathing wrong, a lion's crest on the chest plate, cracked and blood-stained. He pulled the helmet off. The mate bond hit like a blade finding bone. Instant, absolute, irrevocable. Blonde hair in the mud. A face that had no business being on a battlefield. Green eyes opening slowly, glazed with pain, sharpening with confusion, locking onto his. With an expression that told him she felt it too and was already furious about it, Ron Ortiz stood on a battlefield, surrounded by the aftermath of a war he had spent his entire life fighting, and looked at his fated mate, wearing the crest of his enemy. Damn it. This is the story of Ron Ortiz and Erika French, 2 people shaped by the same war from opposite sides, bound by something older than the hatred between their kingdoms, and forced to choose between the vows that made them and the truth that could destroy everything those vows were built on. If something in those first lines just made you lean forward, you already know you belong here. Welcome to Megan's Romance Audiobooks, where every story starts in the dark, and every love costs something real before it gives anything back. Alpha Kings, Rogue Wolves, Forbidden Bonds. The kind of romance that does not let you breathe until the very last line. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. Drop a like on this video if Ron and Erika already have you, because we drop a brand new story every single week, and the next one is already waiting. Don't let it start without you. Chapter 1. The Girl Behind the Wall. The marriage contract arrived on a Tuesday. No ceremony around it, no conversation. Bernard Benoit set it on the dining table during his biannual visit, slid it across the polished wood with 2 fingers, the way you slide a document that has already been decided, and watched Erika's face with the detached attention of a man checking whether an investment was holding its value. Edward Lester, he said, Alpha of the Eastern Ridge Pack. The alliance closes in 30 days. You'll leave in 3 weeks. Erika looked at the contract, then at her father. "You could have sent this by messenger. I wanted to see your face when you read it." She kept her face exactly still. 20 years of practice made that automatic. "Of course," she said. "Thank you for coming personally." He left 2 hours later. She stood at the window and watched his convoy disappear through the gate, and felt the wolf inside her, always controlled, always restrained, begin to pace. 30 days. She had been preparing for 4 years. The maps were memorized and burned. The armor was already hidden in the storage shed behind the East training yard, borrowed piece by piece from damaged equipment no one cataloged anymore. The guards she had trained with in secret, Matthew Thompson most consistently, a patient man who had taught her sword work in abandoned corridors over 3 years of early mornings, would be rotating off their shift at dawn. She had always known this moment would come. She had simply hoped for more warning. The mobilization order arrived the next morning. Bork Pack forces were pushing the eastern border hard. 3 engagements in 6 days, each one deeper into Lyons territory than the last. King Benoit had summoned every available soldier to march immediately. The courtyard outside filled with noise and movement before the sun was fully up. Erika dressed in the dark. The armor was heavier than she remembered. She had gained muscle since the last time she fitted it, which helped with the proportions but made the shoulder plates sit wrong. She adjusted them 3 times before accepting that wrong-fitting armor on a moving battlefield was still better than a wedding dress in Edward Lester's territory. She tied her hair tight at the nape of her neck, placed the helmet, became anonymous. No one looked twice at one more soldier joining the chaos of the courtyard. "This is living," the wolf said quietly. "Not yet," Erika answered. "Ask me again if we survive." The march lasted 2 days. She rode in the middle of the formation with her head down and her mouth shut, listening to the soldiers around her trade stories about past campaigns, complaints about the cold, speculation about the Bork Alpha. 7 feet if he's an inch, one soldier said. "I saw him at the Kelton engagement 3 years back. Put down 4 of ours before the line even formed." "They say he doesn't shift," another said. "Doesn't need to. They say he made a vow over his mother's grave to destroy every Lyons soldier breathing." Erika kept her eyes forward and filed that away. When they reached the border town at dusk, the sun was painting everything the color of old blood. Parts of the outer wall were burning. Beyond the smoke, she could see the Bork formation, disciplined, dark-armored, already repositioning for the next push. Her heart rate climbed. The wolf stirred, not in fear, but in recognition. "Something is about to change," it said. Erika tightened her grip on the sword. She already knew. Chapter 2. The Alpha King's Vow. Bryant Gabriel had followed Ron Ortiz into 11 campaigns. He had seen him walk into burning buildings to pull wounded soldiers out, had seen him negotiate a ceasefire with 3 broken ribs and never once let his voice waver, had seen him go 3 days without sleep during the Kelton siege and still outperform every rested soldier on the line. In 11 campaigns, Bryant Gabriel had never once seen Ron Ortiz hesitate, until now. Before every battle, Ronan went alone. The soldiers knew better than to follow. Johnny Smith, pack medic, 11 years running, the only man in Bork Pack who spoke to Ronan like a person rather than a title, had tried once. Early in his first campaign, Ron had looked at him with an expression so quietly devastating that Johnny had turned around without a word and never tried again. The photograph was small, worn at the edges from handling. Linda Lyons, before she was a casualty, before she was a headline, before she became the fuel for 30 years of war, sitting in a garden somewhere, laughing at something outside the frame. Ron held it for exactly 1 minute. He had timed it once, years ago, and the discipline of it had stuck. "I remember," he said quietly. The words were always the same. "I remember what they did. I remember what I swore. I remember why." He put the photograph away. He went to war. The Eastern engagement lasted 4 hours. Ron fought in human form. He almost always did. Shifting consumed energy that was better spent on precision, and precision was what Ron Ortiz did better than anyone breathing. Bryant Gabriel ran the left flank with the efficiency of a man who had learned to anticipate Ron's movements without being told. Johnny Smith stayed back with the medic line, which was where Ron had put him, and where he would stay regardless of his own opinion on the matter. The Lyons line broke at hour 3. Ron walked the field after, the part he had never been able to skip, no matter how many campaigns had tried to train it out of him. Bryant had stopped questioning it years ago. Johnny called it Ron's conscience taking inventory. Ron had never confirmed or denied that. He found 4 survivors, had them brought back to camp. Standard protocol, they would be held, treated, eventually released. He was turning to the next section when the wolf inside him went completely still. Not a threat response. Something older, something he had no category for. Ron stopped. He turned his head slowly, following the sensation the way you follow a sound you aren't sure you actually heard. And then he saw it. A body in ill-fitting armor 30 feet ahead. Lion's crest. Too small for the proportions. Chest rising and falling in the shallow, careful rhythm of someone losing the fight to stay conscious. He walked toward it. Each step made the sensation in his chest grow louder. He knelt, checked the pulse at the neck. Then he pulled the helmet off. The mate bond detonated. Heat. Absolute and total. Every nerve ending firing simultaneously. The wolf inside him, always controlled, always silent, roared with a recognition so complete it left no room for denial. Mate. Ron sat back on his heels in the mud and looked at the face in front of him. Blonde hair, blood at the temple, green eyes opening slowly, glazing, trying to focus. Beautiful. The thought arrived before he could stop it. Then, Lion's crest. Ron Ortiz looked up at the sky for one long second, then back down at her. "Of course," he said quietly, "to no one. To the universe, to the ancient forces that wove destinies and apparently had a vicious sense of humor. Of course it's her." He lifted her with a care that had no business existing in a man built the way he was built, and carried her off the battlefield without another word. Bryant Gabriel watched from the tree line, expression unreadable. Then he exhaled slowly. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "that's new." Chapter 3. The Cell and the Conversation. The first thing Erika registered was the ceiling. Stone. Unfamiliar. The specific gray of a building that had been standing long enough to stop apologizing for itself. The second thing was the pain, her shoulder, deep and healing. The particular ache of a werewolf wound knitting itself back together faster than a human body could manage, but slower than she needed it to. The third thing was him. He was sitting in the chair across the room with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on her, completely still, the way large things go still when they are thinking rather than resting. No armor now, just dark clothes, a jaw that looked like it had been set against something for a very long time, and eyes the color of amber that were currently doing something she recognized, taking inventory. She was doing the same thing. One door, one window, narrow, north-facing, useless. One guard outside, footsteps too regular to be anything but posted. The man across from her was too large for the chair and didn't seem to notice or care. "You're awake," he said. Not a greeting, an observation. "You were watching me sleep," Erika said. "You were watching me breathe. There's a difference." She sat up slowly, testing the shoulder. Functional. She filed that under manageable and moved on. "Where am I?" "Borkpack territory. Eastern Castle." A pause. "You're not a prisoner." The guard outside the door suggests otherwise. The guard outside the door, he said evenly, is keeping my soldiers from getting to you before I've decided what to do with you. That's not imprisonment. That's logistics. Erika looked at him for a moment. Then she swung her legs over the side of the cot and stood, slowly because the room tilted briefly, but she kept her feet and walked to the window. Pine trees, a training yard below, stone walls extending further than she could see from this angle. "You're Ron Ortiz," she said. "Yes, Alpha King of Borkpack." She turned to look at him. "The man who made a vow to destroy everything carrying the Lyons name?"
Something moved behind his eyes. "Where did you hear that?" "Two soldiers on the march. Neither of them said it like it was a rumor. He didn't confirm or deny, which was its own kind of confirmation. You're not Lyons," he said. "The armor was stolen. The crest doesn't match your bloodline's scent." Erika went still. "What do you know about my bloodline?" "Less than I intend to." He leaned forward slightly. "Who are you?" And here it was, the moment she had 3 prepared answers for: denial, deflection, a clean, partial truth that would hold up under moderate pressure. She had rehearsed all 3 in various forms over years of navigating her father's world. She used none of them. "My name is Erika French," she said. "I'm not a Lyons soldier. I joined the march to get away from a marriage contract my father signed without consulting me." She held his gaze. "I was looking for the truth about this war. I didn't expect to find the battlefield quite so literally." Ron studied her with the focused attention of a man who had learned to read people the way other people read maps, looking for the gap between what was said and what was meant. He found nothing, which told him more than anything she had said. "Your father," he said carefully. "Who is he?" Erika looked at him across the room, at the amber eyes that were sharper than they had any right to be, at the man sitting in a chair too small for him, carrying a vow too heavy for anyone. "That," she said quietly, "is the question I'm still trying to answer." The silence that followed had weight and texture. Ron sat back. His eyes didn't leave her face. "Are you hungry?" he said finally. Erika blinked. Of everything she had expected him to say next, that was not it. "Yes," she admitted. He stood, all of him, which was considerable, and moved to the door. He said something to the guard outside. Then he turned back. "Eat first," he said. "Then we talk." Erika sat back down on the cot and looked at the door he had just stepped out of. The wolf inside her was quiet, not wary, not alarmed, something else entirely. She filed that away too. Chapter 4. Sally Ward and the Threat Underneath. Carol Donahue arrived on a Wednesday. Black vehicle, Lyons territory plates, one assistant who carried a single briefcase and said nothing. She stepped out onto the castle gravel in a gray coat that cost more than most soldiers made in a month, looked at the Bork castle the way someone looks at a negotiating table they have already decided to own, and smiled at Ron like they had done this before. They had done this before. "Ceasefire proposal," Bryant Gabriel murmured to Erika as they watched from the upper corridor window. "Happens every 18 months, but not scents her because she never loses the room." Erika watched Carol cross the courtyard below. She knew that walk. Unhurried, deliberate. The specific economy of movement that belonged to people who had learned that urgency was something you performed only when you wanted the other person to feel it. "How long is she staying?" 2 days, Bryant said. "Maybe 3. Erika said nothing. 2 days was a long time to be in the same building as someone whose entire value to Bernard Bennett was the ability to notice things other people missed. Dinner that evening was formal, the long table in the east dining room, candlelight, the kind of setting that reminded visitors they were guests rather than equals. Ron at the head, Carol to his right, Bryant Gabriel and Johnny Smith flanking the sides. Johnny visibly uncomfortable in formal clothes, Bryant visibly comfortable in everything. Erika sat across from Carol. The conversation moved through expected channels: ceasefire terms, territorial boundaries, supply route negotiations that Ron received with the flat patience of a man who had learned to wait out the parts that didn't matter. Carol was smooth, practiced. She laughed precisely when laughing served her, and pressed precisely when pressing served her better. But her eyes kept coming back to Erika. Not constantly, not obviously, the way a compass needle returns to north, patient, inevitable, without drama. Erika ate her dinner, said very little, felt each glance like a hand pressing gently but firmly on her shoulder. After the meal, Ron was pulled aside by Bryant over a border logistics issue. Johnny disappeared toward the kitchens with the focused energy of a man who stress ate and wasn't apologizing for it. The assistant cleared the remaining dishes with quiet efficiency. And then it was just Carol and Erika in the long, candlelit room. Carol set down her wine glass. "You're very composed," she said, "for someone in your situation." "I find formal dinners clarifying," Erika said. Carol smiled. It was a precise expression, warm enough to be disarming, controlled enough to be a weapon. "I've been doing this work for 14 years. She tilted her head slightly. "I have an excellent memory for faces, particularly faces that Bernard Benoit has asked me to remember." The candles burned. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed. Erika kept her hands loose in her lap. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "I don't think I do." Carol's voice stayed pleasant, conversational, almost gentle, the verbal equivalent of a blade kept just out of sight. "The hair is different. The name on the guest register is definitely different." She leaned forward slightly. "But the eyes are exactly right. They're always exactly right." She let that land. "I'm not here to create a scene," Carol continued, standing and smoothing her coat with the calm of someone who had already written the ending. "That's not the message." She picked up her wine glass and moved toward the door. "The message is this: leave the castle quietly. Within 48 hours. No disruption, no drama." She paused in the doorway without turning around, or Bernard Benoit will be forced to take a personal interest in why his daughter is sleeping under the roof of his oldest enemy. She walked out. The candles flickered in the draft from the corridor. Erika sat alone at the long table and looked at the door for a long moment. Then she looked at her hands. They were shaking, first time since this started. She pressed them flat against the table and breathed slowly until they stopped. Then she picked up her wine glass, finished what was left in it, and set it back down with a steadiness that cost her more than it looked like. 48 hours, she said quietly to the empty room. The candles offered nothing useful in response. Chapter 5. What the Alpha Keeps. He came to her door at 7 in the evening. No knock, just, "Come with me," said through the wood in a voice that had already decided, and Erika opened the door because she had learned in 4 days that when Ron Ortiz issued an invitation, it was never actually optional and was always worth following. He took her to the war room. It was at the center of the castle's east wing. No windows, low ceiling, the kind of room that existed to hold difficult things without apologizing for them. Maps covered every wall, layered so many times the original borderlines bled through the current ones like old scars showing through new skin. A long table ran the length of the room. A tactical board on the far wall was strung with thread and markers connecting points across 4 territories. Erika stood in the doorway and took it in. "Sit down," Ron said. She sat. He didn't present it like a briefing. He talked the way someone does when they have been carrying something alone long enough that even partial company becomes necessary. Not performing, not explaining, just laying it out the way you lay out evidence when you finally have someone worth showing it to.
30 years of war, 6 leadership changes in Lyons territory, each transition followed within months by a new escalation, new border aggression, new casualties, new justification for Bork Pack retaliation. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence, and too precise to be incompetence. Someone was maintaining the war deliberately. The council's position, Ron said, tapping a file on the table, has always been that Lyons' aggression is ideological. That they hate us because of history. He paused. But ideology doesn't have a supply chain. He slid a second file across the table. Erika opened it. Logistics reports, procurement records, 3 shell accounts funneling weapons and funding into Lyons' military operations across 18 months, each one traceable, with patience, back to a single coordinating signature. "You did this yourself," she said. "Bryant helped with the financial trail." A pause. "Most of my council-appointed analysts stopped being objective about 2 years ago." Erika turned a page. Stopped. A requisition document. Standard formatting, printed header, columns of supply data. But in the margin, handwritten, slightly careless, the annotation of someone who never expected this document to be read by anyone outside their own operation, a name, a contact reference. B. Benoit. Her stomach dropped straight through the floor. She kept her face still. Years of dining room performances with her father had made that reflex automatic. "Bernard Benoit," she said, carefully. "He's listed as a contact on a Lyons military procurement file." Not just a contact. Ron's jaw tightened. Cross-reference the dates against the escalation pattern. Every major Lyons offensive in the last decade was preceded by a Benoit procurement approval. He looked at the tactical board. "He's not funding one side of this war." Erika looked up. "He's funding both," Ron said. The room went very quiet. Erika turned another page, then another. The thread running through the documents was precise and patient, the work of someone who had been building this for decades, maintaining just enough conflict to keep both kingdoms too destabilized to examine their own leadership too closely. She knew this handwriting, not from intelligence files, not from pack correspondence, from the documents that had defined her own life, the residence contracts, the training restrictions, the marriage agreement with Edward Lester, signed and delivered without consultation. Bernard Benoit's handwriting was as familiar to her as her own, and it was everywhere in these files. She closed the folder slowly, set it on the table. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. She was sitting across from the one man with the resources and the motivation to dismantle everything her father had built. And she was the one person in either kingdom who could confirm his evidence from the inside. She couldn't tell him that yet, not until she was certain, not until she had thought through every angle of what happened the moment she handed Ron Ortiz the confirmation he had been building toward for 3 years. Because once she said it, there was no version of events where her life looked the same afterward. Ron watched her across the table. Something shifted in his expression. Not suspicion, not warmth. The specific quality of attention a man gives when he senses that the person across from him knows more than they are currently saying and has a reason for the silence that he hasn't earned yet. He didn't push. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, brief, steady, the way you anchor something that is at risk of drifting. Neither of them mentioned it. "You'll find him," Erika said quietly. "Whoever is behind this, you'll find him." Ron looked at her for a long moment. "I already have," he said. "I just need one more thing." "What?" Someone who was close enough to confirm it. The silence that followed had the particular weight of two people sitting on opposite sides of the same truth. Erika did not look away. Neither did he. Chapter 6. The night before. Carol Donahue left before breakfast. Bryant Gabriel reported it to Ron over coffee. Early departure, no notice, her vehicle through the east gate before the morning patrol completed its first rotation. Ron set his cup down and looked at Bryant with the expression that meant he had already calculated the implications and didn't like any of them. "Benoit's army," Bryant said. "Eastern scouts put them 2 territories out, moving faster than the standard mobilization pace. How long?" 3 days. Maybe less." Ron nodded once, dismissed Bryant with a look. Then he sat alone at the breakfast table for 4 minutes before he stood up and went to find Erika. She was in the library, not reading, sitting at the table with a closed book in front of her and her hands flat on the cover, staring at the middle distance with the focused stillness of someone running calculations that had no clean answer. Ron closed the door behind him. He looked different without the operational armor of his normal day, still in dark clothes, still carrying everything that made rooms adjust around him when he entered, but the exhaustion was finally visible, the kind that lives behind the eyes and only shows itself when the performance of certainty gets too heavy to maintain. "Carol is gone," Erika said. Not a question. "Yes, and my father's army. 3 days." She absorbed that without moving. Then she looked up at him, and something in her expression had shifted. The careful distance she had maintained since the war room, the slight holding back of a woman who had learned that full disclosure was a luxury she couldn't afford, it was still there, but thinner now. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat across from her, and then, without preamble, without strategy, the way things come out when there is no longer enough time to manage them carefully, he told her about his mother. Not the Val version, not the story he told himself before battles, the real version. The garden in the photograph, the specific sound of her laugh, the way it started low and built, the way it made everyone in the room feel like they had done something right just by being present for it. The way 8-year-old Ron had waited for 3 days after the summit for someone to explain that a mistake had been made, that she was coming back, that the blood on the marble floor had belonged to someone else. Nobody came to explain it, so he explained it to himself, in the only language available to an 8-year-old boy with no one left to ask: rage, and the vow that gave the rage a direction. Erika listened without interrupting, without offering comfort that would have felt like an intrusion. When he finished, she told him about Edward Lester, not the political version, the real one, the way her father had described the marriage as an opportunity rather than a transaction, as if the reframing would change what it was. The specific quality of dread that had settled in her chest the morning the contract arrived. Not surprise, because she had always known something like this was coming. But the particular devastation of a thing you had dreaded arriving exactly as you feared it would. The silence that followed held both their histories in it without collapsing under the weight. Then Erika reached across the table and opened the file she had carried from the war room. She pointed to the margin annotation, B. Benoit. "I know that handwriting," she said quietly. "I have seen it on every document that defined my life since I was born." She met his eyes. "My father is not a Lyons loyalist. He is not a pack patriot. He is a man who built 30 years of war because destabilized kingdoms are easier to control than stable ones." Ron went very still. "You're certain. I'm certain." The weight of 3 years of evidence finally confirmed, settled over the room like something physical. Ron looked at her across the table, really looked, the way he had been carefully not doing since the battlefield. And what was in his eyes now had nothing to do with strategy or logistics or the war outside the walls. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About the mate bond?" Erika said quietly. He stopped. "I felt it too," she said, "on the battlefield, when you lifted the helmet and your hand touched my face." She kept her voice steady. "I didn't know if you were going to use it against me, so I waited. And now?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Now I know you better than that." Rowan reached across the table. His hand found hers, not briefly this time, not the anchoring gesture of the war room. He held on. "I've been certain about everything my entire life," he said quietly. You're the first thing that's made me understand that certainty and truth are not the same thing. The night settled around them. Outside, 3 days away, an army was moving. Inside, in the quiet of a library that smelled like old paper and pine, two people who had been shaped by the same war from opposite sides made a choice that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the specific courage it takes to reach for something when you cannot guarantee the outcome. They didn't waste what was left of the night. Chapter 7. The Declaration. Bernard Benoit's army arrived 2 days early. Matthew Thompson sent the alarm up at dawn. 3 columns, eastern approach, full military formation, moving with the specific urgency of a man who had received information he wasn't supposed to have and decided to use it before the advantage expired. Julia Elder had moved faster than any of them anticipated. Ron received the report at breakfast. He set down his coffee, looked at Bryant Gabriel. Bryant nodded once, the silent communication of 2 men who had been reading the same room for 11 campaigns and no longer needed words for the obvious parts. "Formation," Ron said. "Full assembly at the gate. 20 minutes." The courtyard assembled in 18. Erika came down with them. Nobody told her not to. Nobody had the specific courage required to suggest it. When she appeared in the courtyard dressed and ready, Bryant Gabriel looked at her for a long moment and then looked at Ron with an expression that said, "This is your conversation, and I want no part of it." Ron looked at Erika. Erika looked back. "Don't," she said quietly. He didn't. Bernard Benoit's delegation came through the outer gate first. 3 vehicles, Lyons territory flags, 6 soldiers in formal escort formation. Behind them, visible through the gate and spreading wide along the tree line, the full army. Hundreds of soldiers, tents already going up on the ridge. Benoit stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was exactly as Erika remembered, tall, controlled, the face of a man who had spent decades ensuring that every room he entered already belonged to him before he arrived. His eyes found the assembled Bork soldiers first, cataloged them efficiently, then found Ron, then found Erika. Something moved across his face. Surprise, genuine, the first genuine thing she had seen from him in 20 years. Then fury so absolute, it went completely cold. He walked forward until he stood at the edge of the neutral ground between both formations. Ron moved to meet him, Erika at his right, Bryant at his left. "Alpha Ortiz?" Benoit's voice carried across the courtyard without effort. "I've come for my daughter. Return her immediately, and we discuss the rest civilly." "She's not your property," Ron said. "She stopped being that the moment she chose to leave." She was deceived, manipulated. Benoit's eyes cut to Erika. "Come here, Erika. This has gone far enough." Erika looked at her father across 20 feet of open ground. 20 years of conditioning pulled at her, the instinct to smooth things over, to find the angle that made her useful enough to be safe, to perform whatever version of herself the room required. She let it pull, then she let it go. "No," she said. The word landed in the silence like a stone into still water. Both armies heard it. Benoit's expression didn't change. "That is not a choice you're permitted to make." "I'm making it anyway." Erika stepped forward, out from behind Ron into the open space where every soldier on both sides could see her clearly. "I'm making it because someone should have made it 30 years ago." She looked at Benoit's soldiers, his soldiers, the men and women who had served Lyons territory their entire lives. "Bernard Benoit has been funding both sides of this war," she said. Her voice carried. She made sure of it. "For 30 years. Shell accounts, procurement networks, supply chains running weapons into Borkpak territory and Lyons territories simultaneously." She reached into her jacket and produced the copied documents. "I have his signature on the requisition orders." Murmurs broke through Benoit's formation. Benoit's face went from cold fury to something more dangerous, the expression of a man recalculating in real time. Lies, fabricated by the enemy to destabilize. Your handwriting, Erika said steadily, on documents I have seen since childhood. The same hand that signed my residence contracts, my training restrictions, my marriage agreement with Edward Lester. She looked directly at her father. I know your handwriting better than I know my own. The murmurs in Benoit's formation grew louder. Edward Lester, standing 3 men back in the delegation, went the specific color of a man watching his investment collapse in real time. Benoit took 1 step forward. Erika, enough. I'm done being enough, she said. I'm done being useful and quiet and shaped into whatever you needed me to be. Her voice didn't waver. You built a war on top of a murder and called it ideology. You sold me to seal an alliance and called it opportunity. And you have spent 30 years letting soldiers on both sides die to maintain a conflict that only ever served you. The silence that followed was absolute. Ronan stepped forward to stand beside her. Erika French, he said, his voice carrying across both formations, is under Bork Pack protection. He looked at Benoit directly. She is my mate. Declared before both armies, on record. Any attempt to remove her from this territory will be treated as a declaration of war. Benoit looked between them. Something shifted in his eyes, the calculation of a man who had always had an exit and was discovering that this room had none. Then war it is, he said quietly. He turned to his soldiers. Siege formation. Nobody enters or leaves this castle. He looked at Erika one last time, not with love, not with grief, but with the cold assessment of a man tallying a loss. You chose your side, he said. I chose the truth, Erika answered. You taught me its value. You just never expected me to use it against you. Benoit turned and walked back toward his army. The castle gates closed. The war drums started. Ron's hand found hers in the space between their bodies. Not dramatically, not for the armies to see. Just his fingers closing over hers. Steady, certain. Together, he said quietly. Erika held on. Together. Chapter 8. The War That Ends a War. The siege broke at dawn, not because Benoit's army weakened, because Ron Ortiz decided that waiting inside walls was not how this ended. We go to them, he told Bryant Gabriel at first light. Open formation, full force. Bryant looked at him for exactly 1 second. Understood. The gates opened. Erika thought beside Ron, not behind him, not protected in the second line where Bryant had quietly suggested she might consider positioning herself. Beside him, blade drawn, armor fitted properly this time, the wolf inside her finally fully awake and done pretending otherwise. The first engagement was brutal and fast. Benoit's front line was disciplined, but fighting a defensive posture. Soldiers who had marched here on orders, but were now looking at documents their alpha's own daughter had produced, and fighting with the specific uncertainty of people who weren't sure anymore what they were defending. Uncertainty in a battle line is a crack, and cracks, under enough pressure, become breaks. Roan moved through the field with the same precise devastation Erika had heard described around campfires on the march here. Controlled, efficient, every movement purposeful. She matched his pace on the right flank, covering the angles he couldn't cover. The coordination between them so instinctive, it made Bryant Gabriel shake his head from the left flank with an expression caught somewhere between admiration and disbelief. 2 weeks, he said to Johnny Smith, who was pulling a wounded soldier clear of the eastern line. They've known each other 2 weeks. The bond, Johnny said simply. It doesn't care about the calendar. The critical moment came an hour in. Bernard Benoit shifted. The wolf was massive, dark-furred, battle-hardened, the alpha form of a man who had spent 30 years maintaining his power through force when politics wasn't sufficient. He broke through the eastern line, heading directly for Ron with the focused devastation of someone who had decided that if the documents were going to destroy him anyway, he was taking the thing that mattered most first. Julia Elder's signal came from the ridge, 3 short flashes. The trap Ron had spent the pre-dawn hours positioning. 5 wolves converged simultaneously. Bryant from the left, Matthew Thompson from the right. 3 of Ron's best from the flanks. Not to kill, to capture. Benoit fought with the ferocity of a man who understood exactly what capture meant, but 5 coordinated wolves against 1, regardless of how powerful that one was, had a mathematical conclusion. They brought him down, pinned, breathing, alive. Ron shifted back to human and walked to stand before him. "Shift," he said quietly. "Face this as a man." Benoit shifted. Someone threw a cloak over him. Soldiers hauled him upright. The battlefield went silent. Ron looked at Erika across the open ground. She walked to stand beside him, because that was where she belonged, and everyone present understood it now. "Bernard Benoit," Ron said, his voice carrying across both armies. "By the law of our people, you have 3 choices: death, exile, or full transfer of power to your direct heir." Benoit looked at his defeated army, at the documents his own soldiers were now passing between themselves, at his daughter standing beside the man he had spent 30 years trying to destroy. Something shifted in his face, not remorse, not love, something colder and more honest. The reckoning of a man who had always known this architecture would eventually collapse, and had simply bet it wouldn't happen in his lifetime. He looked at Erika. "You have your mother's eyes," he said. "I always hated that." "I know," Erika said. "Choose. Transfer of power," he said, "and exile." He looked at the signet ring on his hand, removed it slowly, and held it out. "Everything. Yours." Erika took it without hesitation. Edward Lester surrendered his claim quietly and was escorted away before anyone had to deal with him at length. Carol Donahue stood at the edge of the defeated line, watched the ring change hands, nodded once with the minimal acknowledgement of a woman who had always known how things would end, and walked away. The drums stopped. The war that had outlasted the generation that started it ended not with an explosion, but with a ring placed in a daughter's hand by the man who should have chosen her freely and never did. Epilogue. Somewhere worth building. 3 months later, the castle gleamed under a full moon. Flowers from both territories, Bork silver and Lyons gold, woven through every corridor and archway. 2 peoples learning, slowly and imperfectly, to share space without the war that had defined them. Erika stood before the mirror in a dress she had chosen herself. Bryant Gabriel knocked and entered, because when there is no father worth the name, sometimes it falls to the man who has watched everything and said the least. He looked at her for a long moment. "Ron doesn't deserve you," he said. "He knows that. It's why he'll spend the rest of his life trying to." Erika smiled. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said." "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation." The ceremony was ancient words about bound souls and fated mates, and peace that begins with a single choice made by people brave enough to make it. Johnny Smith cried openly and did not apologize. Julia Elder stood in the back, no longer an intelligence officer for anyone, just a woman watching history correct itself and deciding that was enough.
Matthew Thompson stood at attention the entire ceremony because old habits and new emotions apparently couldn't occupy the same body simultaneously. When Erika appeared at the end of the hall, Ron's expression did the thing Bryant had described once to Johnny in a quiet moment, like a man who spent his whole life certain about everything, finally finding the one thing he couldn't have predicted and realizing it's the only thing that ever mattered. The ceremony ended. 2 kingdoms, 1 future. Somewhere on a road that led nowhere in particular, a man who had once been a pack leader walked alone. No kingdom, no name, no army. And in the castle where silver and gold had learned to grow together, Erika French, alpha queen of 2 united territories, laced her fingers through Ron Ortiz's and understood for the first time what it felt like to be chosen. Not useful, not strategic, not shaped into something for someone else's purpose. Chosen. Freely, completely, without condition. And that, at last, was enough. If this story held you from the first line, if you were breathing differently by the time Erika looked her father in the face and said choose, you already know you belong here. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. Drop a like on this video if Ron and Erika earned it, because this is Megan's Romance Audiobooks, where every story starts in the dark and every love costs something real before it gives anything back. Alpha Kings, Rogue Wolves, Forbidden Bonds, the kind of romance that rewrites everything you thought you knew about what love is supposed to look like. A brand new story drops every single week, and the next one is already waiting for you. Don't let it start without you.